Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be looking at Egypt International Cooperation Forum. The summit in its second edition was actually held at the new administrative capital under the auspices of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who reiterated that such a conference is actually a pushing force, a locomotive, preparatory as well, locomotive for the COP27 summit that will be taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh next November, helping all the African states within the African continent really trying to achieve their sustainable development goals, also trying to combat the climate file. And we're going to be focusing on this tonight, but before we start doing that, let's check out the main story making the news today, where President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi kicked off a two-day official visit to Qatar today upon an invitation from the Gulf country's Emir Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. Upon his arrival, President el-Sisi, along with his accompanying delegation, was received by Prince Tamim at Hamad International Airport in Doha. Presidential spokesperson Bassam Radi said the visit, the first to Qatar, caps extensive talks between the two sides with the aim of expanding bilateral cooperation on all stages. He said both sides will discuss coordination over various regional and international issues of mutual concern at a critical time that draws the need for combining efforts to protect the Arab national security. The Qatari Emir visited Cairo in June when Qatari investments in Egypt were high on the agenda, as well as cooperation in the energy and agriculture sectors. In late March, Cairo said Qatar planned to invest $5 billion in Egypt, while hydrocarbon giant Qatar Energy announced an agreement with U.S. major ExxonMobil to acquire a 40% stake in a gas exploration block off Egypt in the Mediterranean. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Before we start talking about the Egypt International Cooperation Forum, I want to shed light on the visit of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi to Qatar, the first actually of its kind by the President to Qatar. And before we start discussing that, let me welcome my very distinguished guest, Dr. Cherif Amir, the Professor of International Affairs at the University of Paris. Dr. Amir, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Dr. Amir, now this is the first visit by the President to Qatar upon the invitation of the Qatari Prince. Now, they actually met when he came to Cairo, visited last June. They're talking about many regional issues, notably cooperation in the energy sector and agricultural sector. What is the significance of the development as well of the Egyptian-Qatari relations over the past few years?
Well, we all know that these relations went through difficult times. Let's be very frank about that. And we went through the process of let's say the diplomatic boycott with our brothers in the Gulf states. But I think that now things are changing, and I think that the visit which was made by Prince Tamim to Egypt, it was a good sign of goodwill, telling Egypt we want to open a new page. I think that President Sisi knows very well the position of Egypt and where is its interest, and we trust the decision of the President in these cases, because we all know how it was very, very tense with Qatar. So the President is very keen not to lose any of our friends in the region. And I think that the meeting with Prince Tamim is a way to say that Egypt is always open for the dialogue and restore relations if Egypt's interest and sovereignty is being respected. And I think that the visit of President Sisi today is a message to the Egyptian people in the first place, telling them that Egypt's rights are being guaranteed, Egypt's sovereignty is being respected, and that we are willing now to start a new era.
Well, during the last visit in June by Prince Tamim to Cairo, Qatar has actually pledged to invest about $5 billion in Egypt, and now Qatar Energy, the firm, is about to buy 40% stake at ExxonMobil of the United States, which in turn really deals with the gas exploration of Egypt in the Mediterranean. So does that mean that things are progressing not just diplomatically, but also in terms of trade cooperation and economic cooperation between both countries, that they will be taking part in one of the major sectors here in Egypt for the future, the energy sector?
Well, I'm sure that what is taking place not only in the Middle East, but also in the energy sector in the world, in the crisis between Russia and Ukraine now, we all know that this card is being played heavily by the Russians, and it's getting some results. And I think that states like Egypt, like Qatar and other Middle Eastern states are trying now to find a solution in order to not to upset the Americans or the Western Bloc, because let's say it frankly, we need to have a way of stability so our economies won't be hurt. And that's why I think that the organizing or the coordination between Egypt, which has this energy or the gas supplies, and Qatar also, which has the money and the investment, it will be an extraordinary step towards this stability of the markets. But let's stay very, very alert, because things could change in a day or in just one day. Let me give you an example. Yesterday, for example, the war escalated between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And why Azerbaijan started the war? Because it has signed a gas deal with the EU, and the EU has given the green light to Azerbaijan to act. So look how the geopolitical and military things are being guided with these kind of transactions.
Yes.
So if we will deal with our, let's say, competitors before, which is now our collaborators, I mean, Qatar, we are working together. If we will take advantage of these situations also, we could have a very powerful positions toward the EU, who needs the gas supply, and also towards Russia, because we are telling them we are trying to exploit only our fields. We don't want to upset them. And I think that we have the leadership that can take the real, exact, precise decisions at the moment that it could be taken.
Yes. Well, this leadership is also focusing not just on the Gulf states and the eastern states, but also looking at the whole of the African continent within the African states. Now, the Egypt International Cooperation Forum 2022, the second edition took place at the new administrative capital under the auspices of the presidency, who reiterated that it is a big push ahead of the COP27 summit. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
The Egypt ICF 2022 in its second edition was held at the new administrative capital under the auspices of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who asserted that Egypt International Cooperation Forum ICF 2022 represents strong pushing power for the anticipated conference of partners on climate change COP27, which Egypt is scheduled to host in November in the Red Sea resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh. President el-Sisi also stressed the forum supports Sustainable Development Goals agenda, particularly in the African continent, and affirmed that mitigation and adaptation to climate change lacks to the required finances. He explained it was important to reach a consensus on an inclusive vision for developing countries and African economies that would support their ability to adapt to climate change, especially since they contribute only 3% of global emissions. Touching upon the COP27, President el-Sisi said Egypt is one of the leading countries that set SDG Strategic Plan 2030, which includes the environmental dimension as a key for development. He also said the COP27 comes amid cascading global crises. The head of state expounded that the water treatment projects Egypt is currently undertaking will make the country the only one globally to benefit from every drop of water, stating that these projects are being implemented under a national program whose first phase will be done by the end of this year. Meanwhile, the president said green investments in Egypt account for about 40% of the total public investments, and this will rise to 50% by the next fiscal year. He also added Egypt only contributes 0.06% of global emissions. President el-Sisi stressed Egypt is looking forward to further cooperation with the United States in terms of establishing mitigation and adaptation-based projects in Africa, especially in the energy sector. The President urged the international community to fulfill their climate action commitments, as well as increase grants directed to developing and African countries to support their adaptation and mitigation efforts.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Without further ado, let's talk about Egypt ICF 2022. Dr. Amir, now this international forum really looks at Egypt taking the lead among the African states, trying to help the African states reach the Sustainable Development Goals, also help them combat climate change. But let's first talk about the SDGs and the development work that the African states need. Now, Egypt will be, obviously by hosting the COP27 and obviously by its leading political role within the continent, it's really spearheading and as a sort of ambassador for the African states. But are the African states all united and have a unified vision towards the goals they need, the assistance they need for them to really protect their wealth of natural resources, protect their political interests, the security and the sovereignty, because things are very different among all the African states?
As you said, things are very different. Things are changing in the whole of Africa. Let's take an example, Mali. It has also some natural resources as the gold and uranium and other important raw materials for France. France, for the first time since the colonization, first time since that time in 2022 now, it has been kicked out of the country, and Russia replaced it. So I think that the African countries, Central Africa is being now under the Russian control, so, and other parts under the Chinese control. So we cannot say that the African countries have their own say as we have thought before. Maybe countries like Egypt, like South Africa, still have their say in the continent, Morocco, maybe Algeria, but the other parts, the heart of Africa, from the west to the east and in the heart of Africa. I think that there is a huge game that is taking place now between Russia, between the EU states, especially France, and also China. So in order to say they have something to agree upon, I don't know if this could happen in the coming years. I won't say the coming months, because the coming months things are very dangerous now. So I think that once these countries will settle and agree upon a national, or let's say a geopolitical policies for the continent, maybe you can say that they would have a united position. But right now, I have to be frank, we have countries that have, Mali, as I said, decided to boycott and cut all the diplomatic relations with France. The Senegal has problems with Mali, and Algeria has problems with Morocco, and every country in this continent now is trying to reshape its policies. Who will gain at the end? I hope that the African nations would be the benefits, the beneficiaries. But let's say something, that the President Sisi, when he was the head of the African Union, he tried to put a policy of economic cooperation between the African states, so we could all have one word. But let's say again that policies change, geopolitical situation change, and unfortunately we're still under the spell of the superpowers, whether the US, whether the EU, whether the Russian Federation or China.
Well, the president has been really working on strengthening the Egyptian relations with the Gulf states. I mean, talking about Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar, Iraq as well, Jordan, Bahrain, all these countries. And he's also been working on strengthening the relations with the African states, and you've highlighted the differences and difficulties the African states are going through, in addition to the Tigray issue with Ethiopia as well. So unifying all the African visions could be a challenge, but at the same time, the whole world is suffering from, I mean, post-COVID, and also the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, which doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon, especially with the big advances that Ukraine has achieved over the past couple of days. So it's really about having this sort of siege mentality between the African states, trying to gather all powers, understanding that maybe the other international communities won't be very much open to cooperate as freely and as they wish, as they used to for the past decades. Especially they're going through their own energy crises and economic recessions. So do you think that maybe these crises that are going going on and taking place in Europe could be one reason or a blessing in disguise for the African states to actually unify their vision and unify their goals?
Well, here it depends on the people of these nations, whether they want to change things or not. And this is what we have highlighted during the conferences of the youth and the African youth in Sharm el-Sheikh and in Aswan. And President Sisi said it several times, you have to, for the young people, you have to be unified, because he had the vision that one day things will change in the continent. Because I'm telling you that, let's say, we are going through historical turmoil in this continent now. There is coup d'etats, there is uprisings, there is energy crisis, there is the COVID still affecting their economies, or economies of the African states. As I said, in North Africa, which was always the stability, now is not stable anymore. Tunisia has its problems, Algeria has its problems with Morocco, Libya, you all know the story, it's deteriorating day after the other. Sudan is still in turmoil. Somalia, of course, failed state. And as you said, Tigray is the genocide taking place there. So it's a huge civil war. I just read before coming on air, there was human rights violations there and war crimes committed by the regime of Abiy Ahmed against the people of Tigray, and there is the UN trying to open an investigation. So things are not really solid in this continent. But as I said, maybe the youth will change things. Maybe the technology will make a revolution. Today we heard, for example, in Kigali, in Rwanda, the internet is being it's the first capital who has the internet free. And the young people are very happy because it will advance the startup projects, and maybe investors from Europe will go and work there. So free internet is a great achievement for a country like Rwanda. So this is a good sign that there is some countries trying to work to improve their situation, to have its position, as we are doing now with our infrastructure projects. We're trying to prove that we are capable of working by our own hands, our own means, and enforce our cooperation with everyone. So the African nations still have a long way to go. As I said, still the struggle between Russia, between France, between China and the United States in this continent is still very, very present. The danger is still present. We have to be very alert. Optimistic, yes, but we have to be very alert, because we all know also that there are some terrorist groups still in this continent, and they are, well, they could have the green light from any of those who are financing them to disturb the situation. So let's be very, very careful.
Well, the COP27 is less than 2 months away now. Do you feel like, because Egypt has been going, holding a lot of summits, a lot of conferences everywhere around the world, really trying to maximize on this opportunity. Do you feel that the African states can pull their socks off in less than 2 months and really focus on their development goals, their climate change fight, and try and work things together in less than 2 months?
It needs a miracle. We need a miracle, because the problem of Africa, and especially the green energy, is money. And who would finance now the African nations in these crises? We heard that Europe is going through a very tough period now before the winter. And Germany especially, which is the wealthiest of the EU. So you can imagine how you could convince them to get from their pocket some euros. For us, it will take a miracle, because they need the money now. So I think that it's very important to look at the bright side for our diplomacy. Why? Because it's a challenge and our diplomacy is doing the maximum to grab the attention of the Western countries towards the sustainable energy in the continent. We are playing all the cards, we are opening all the files, we are talking to everyone, as you said, everywhere, everyone. Conferences are being held. We are not, we're not trying to work for our own, as Egypt's own interests only. No, it's for a whole continent, and it's a wealthy continent because the green energy is in Africa now. It's not like the Amazon now, which is destroyed. We still have the forests, we still have the rivers, we still have the solar energy. We have everything, and maybe the EU, because and the United States will work with us with the money. Maybe the Russians will exploit, as we are trying to convince the Chinese and the Russians, for example, for the sector of the Suez Canal to work. Maybe they will try to invest elsewhere in Africa. I hope that the struggle between the superpowers will be benefit for Africa by challenging each other in a way to build factories, to start new projects, not to destroy and kill.
Yes. Well, a miracle is actually what the Egyptian diplomacy is looking to achieve in the COP27, which is being held under the theme turning pledges to implementation, really getting all the promises that were made during the COP26 in Glasgow to be implemented, the financing, as Dr. Amir mentioned, of the whole SDGs and the climate change file. Let's check out this report regarding Egypt leading the African states for achieving the sustainable development and combating climate change. Let's check it out and we'll be right back.
Egypt seeks to crystallize a joint African vision that accelerates Sustainable Development Goals agenda and climate action, as well as boosts the African intra-cooperation in partnership with global and regional partners amid serious challenges with significant political and economic repercussions on development. These challenges are being reflected on the African continent, mainly on its food security, energy security, health, economy, and the social aspect as well, which confers on Egypt the responsibility of helping African economies to be resilient against external shocks. There's a big necessity to adopt a package of urgent and effective procedures in coordination with the international community and global partners to contain the impacts of the Ukrainian crisis on African states, as well as maintain the security of African supply chains. Sustainable measures should be taken to support food security and the agricultural sector as well. The African continent needs to raise its agricultural production, paving the way for self-sufficiency amid ongoing challenges of water scarcity, price hikes, and climate change. Yet, other challenges must be dealt with, especially the stability of peace and security in the continent, protecting African countries from terrorism, proliferation, weapons smuggling, human trafficking, and illegal immigration. All these challenges need innovative solutions to cope with and effective mechanisms to overcome. Egypt is set to host the UN Climate Change Conference 2022, the COP27, next November in the Red Sea resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh, and has planned to be the voice of Africa at the conference to present its challenges and aspirations, and also to shed light on climate change threats and its related impacts on the Black Continent, which are linked with peace and security issues in the continent as well. Egypt has played a big role in Africa in boosting its peace and development and has stressed the significance of reaching practical solutions to troubles the continent may be suffering from. Egypt's efforts in the climate change sphere come in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals Agenda 2030, Egypt's Vision 2030, and the Africa We Need Agenda for 2063.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our discussion with Dr. Amir. Now, you've mentioned the challenge or the difficulty or the task of actually getting the financing for the climate change file during COP27. Now, there were pledges by the international community, the developed countries, to actually fund about $100 billion to the developing countries every year. That's $100 billion every year to combat climate change. However, that promise has not been fulfilled. So in these times of crises, political, health, all these things, how willing do you think the international community or the developed countries would be willing to invest in such big amounts for this file?
Well, all these billions were promised before the Russian-Ukrainian war.
Yes.
I think now that the international community is being very, very tight about these questions. There's recession everywhere. European countries are trying to manage their economies now to afford to pay the gas. They do not wish to see their population in the streets demonstrating, because many of the EU citizens are questioning what is the use of supporting or not supporting Ukraine, but trying to harass Russia by all means. It's not so I think that the economic situation now is being very, very critical, and the countries, the developing countries, they know that the coming months won't be easy at all, because these countries are going through difficult times. I think that when November comes, things will be clearer, because it will be winter in Europe, and I think that the economies will be very shaky. So maybe we will see another way of promising other billions, but how they will pay it and when it will be paid, we don't know. As you said, the crises are everywhere: political, health, economic, and of course military. So I don't think that these countries will promise as they promised before. Maybe they will try to propose some deals with these countries. And I think they will try to influence again countries like Egypt and the Arab world and Africa to take sides, whether to take the side of the Western Bloc or to take side of the Russian bloc. And I think this would be the main way to promise money. If you will be with us, we will give you the money and the finance. If you won't be with us, well, you will suffer. But I think that the Europeans won't be able to do that now, because they need these finances, they need this money, because they have to find a way for paying the gas bills.
Well, a lot of analysts and observers are actually saying that one thing that could be encouraging for the developed countries to invest, especially for the African states that are very rich and very wealthy in natural resources, is in the field of energy, and trying to create and invest in renewable energy, sustainable energy, green energy, and especially that the European community, also all the developed countries, the superpowers, everyone's suffering from the energy and food crisis. So it seems that energy and agriculture could be very high on the agenda for opportunities to be met. Could this be the bargain, the main strong card that African states could be offering in return for a lot of financial help in terms of climate change and sustainable development goals?
It depends of what we will offer, because we all know that even in agriculture, now it's the grains that being used now as a way of threatening some countries. the Russian President Vladimir Putin said, for example, that when we made the deal that the agricultural products will go out from Ukraine to the needy countries or the African countries, we discovered that the ships were headed to Europe and didn't go to these countries. So they said, well, I have to alert the African countries and the developed countries that, watch out, they are trying to influence your decisions by taking all these supplies and then distributing to you again by taking them from us from the beginning. So I think that the African countries should work now on projects. Egypt worked with countries like Congo and countries like Tanzania and South Sudan in building some dams there.
Yes.
We are working on agriculture projects, electricity projects. So if things will be very, very difficult, as you said, there is bargaining, we could have our own supplies and we could offer it in a better price for the Western countries. So it needs some coordination, it needs some tactics, and I think that leadership like President Sisi could arrange a meeting between the African countries before the COP in November. I think that things will change if we will agree upon one agenda, at least during the conference. At least during that time, there will be one voice.
Well, Egypt has its own goal and vision for achieving Sustainable Development 2030, and it's been working religiously towards that goal. Now, the rest also of the African continent, all the African states, they do, including Egypt, of course, a lot of financing to combat climate change, especially that it is the least continent responsible for climate change and carbon emissions, but also to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So you need financing for both files. Now, how can we reach that or hit that balance between getting the finances and knowing exactly where should the money go for climate change, combating climate change, or achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, which is still very essential to the basic needs for a human?
Well, it needs also in that precise category the coordination with the UN, with the Secretary General Guterres. I think that he's someone who's he's keen, he's not taking political sides like many of his predecessors. He's trying to find a way to gather all the leaders upon one idea. So I think that we as African nations, we have to work with the UN. It's the strong body now. We all know that there will be the UN General Assembly in the coming days in New York. I think that why not we start as African countries, open the subject now. And one of the most important things, we should not put aside the conflicts between the Russians and Europe and the Western Bloc and speak to our friends and partners about the environment. No, we have to put those lines in parallel and talk to them that this war have created energy and food crisis and this would affect the environment. So why not we start talking and finding a new phase of relationship? Because if we will start talking only about the environment, many of them will say, well, it's not, let's postpone it for now. We have much important crisis to deal with. So in order to attract their attention, you have to give them the problem that they are facing and try to explain to them that you could have the solution if they will work with you, if they will offer the money, the financing and all that. But as I said, the equation is very difficult because it's in the heart of Africa now that the struggle between all these superpowers are taking place. So you will have countries pro-France and countries pro-Russia and countries pro-China and other countries like Egypt working for its own sovereignty and protection. So the equation is difficult, and maybe the UN could be the right body that we could work with in the current situation.
Yes. Well, you've mentioned how all these different conferences and meetings, be it with the UN or the COP27, that sometimes there is a chance that countries or states would be, will kind of have to take a certain side. So it's really a political game of chess as well during these conferences and summits. So is this the time maybe, or a big chance for the private sector to be more involved instead of government-owned companies around the world that actually have to abide by the politics of their own country? So maybe it's a chance for the private sector looking at their own economic interests to take the lead in these steps and maybe make a change.
For God's sake, did you see any independence for the private sector in Europe towards Russia, for example? We have all the big brands. They got the order to lose money and get out of the Russian market, and they just left. They could have said, no, we have our independent decision. And this is about the Western countries I'm talking about. I don't want to mention the names of the brands, but big brands of restaurants, fast food, soda drinks, and they lost billions of dollars. So that means that the private sector, unfortunately, is still under the authority of the decision makers. They have only the word in local elections of supporting the campaign of one of the candidates. That's only their limits. But that's why when you see a visit of a European leader, for example, he has all the businessmen accompanying him to this country, because he gets the order, the businessman, you will work with this country and we will sign the agreements with them and open the markets there. So private sector, at the end of the story, the private sector is a part of the politics of the nation.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we are seeing and following over the past few months now, Egypt has been sparing no effort or energy trying to cooperate and strengthen the relations between countries in Asia, countries within the African continent, the European Union, also the US. Everything is being done to make the COP27 a success. As Dr. Amir explained, there are still a lot of challenges and maybe needing a miracle, but the Egyptian diplomacy is known for making miracles come true, and hopefully that will be the case in next November in Sharm el-Sheikh in the COP27 conference. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my very distinguished guest, Dr. Cherif Amir, the Professor of International Affairs at the University of Paris. Dr. Amir, always a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.